Let's talk now about attribution theory, and this is the work of Dr. Heider. So attributions, the way we'll talk about them first, refer to the explanations people offer to themselves about why they experienced something. So, for example, imagine that a person can't find their keys. So they'll explain to themselves what's going on. They're scrounging around, they're looking for the keys, and they start to talk to themselves about what happened. How are they explaining this? And we can describe attributions on 3 different levels. First off, we can describe them as internal versus external, and that's just the reason it happened. So did it happen because of something inside that person, something they did wrong, or is it outside of themselves? And so an example might be internal. The person thinks it's something in them. I must have put them someplace stupid. External would be this house is so poorly organized. So in the first case, the blame is on the self. In the second case, the blame is outward. They can also be stable or unstable. And this one is always a little bit misleading because unstable is actually a more beneficial attribution habit. We can think of it as being the extent of the cause. Is this something that's always present, or is it just due to this situation? And so an example might be of a stable attribution is something like this. I am always setting things down somewhere stupid, which implies that this person is hopeless. There's nothing to be done. This is always what they do. Whereas unstable, something temporary, the person might say, well, my arms were so full when I came home last night. I must have just dropped them wherever I dropped my other things, something like that. So stable is actually the less favorable attribution habit. It means it's always present. Unstable is the one that's changed and adjustable. And finally, the attribution can be global, all-encompassing, or specific, and that's the extent of the effect. So does this encompass every single thing about this person or just this one thing? And so a global example for this situation might be, I'm just stupid about everything. Do you see how this person just broadened the explanation to not just losing the keys, but everything in their life? Whereas a specific says, I really should be more thoughtful about my keys. Now we've just located right here with the keys and we haven't made it any bigger. And so when we think about these explanations or attributions, we can categorize them on these 3 dimensions. We're going to narrow this down or simplify it just a little bit as we go on in this content. But before we do that, let's think for a moment about the attributions we make for other people's behavior. When your partner screws up or someone you don't know screws up, how do you explain their behavior? And so we tend to judge others fairly harshly. You can see both of them sitting here doing their work, and they're both thinking ill thoughts about the other. Anna's unreliable. She can't even attend a meeting on time. And do you see how he made this a stable trait? This is inside of her. She's unreliable. And it's global. He didn't just limit it to this one meeting situation, but made it much broader. And it's internal, it's something inside Anna, and she's doing the same thing. Ben is incompetent. He can't finish his projects on time. Once again, a stable, internal, global accusation. And this is what we tend to do with other people. We tend to attribute other people's behavior to their character without taking into account the limitations and constraints within which they might be operating. And this is called the fundamental attribution error, and it's how we judge others much more harshly than we judge ourselves. So our attribution habits are biased in favor of ourselves and against others, at least in this culture, dominant Western culture, not specifically Navajo culture. So our self-attributions, our explanations for our own blunders, tend to be unstable, specific, and external. So for example, when we screw up, we tend to blame it on the situation. If we've just zoomed by someone on the freeway going way too fast, we might say something like this about our own behavior. I don't normally drive all crazy like that, but I was late and that driver in front of me was just moving at a snail's pace. So we've externalized it. It was the fault of the driver in front of me. We've made it temporary, right? I don't usually do this. And it's also what's the one I missed? And it's also unstable. This is something that's just happening in this situation. So we're pretty kind to ourselves generally. But if someone else does that, goes flying by someone on the freeway, we tend to explain their blunder with just the opposite characteristics, stable, global, and internal. So if that same guy zooms around you, we might say something like, what a jerk that guy is, driving all crazy like that. People like him should have their driver's license revoked. And just by calling him a jerk, we can see that this is an internal. We're saying this guy is a jerk. This characteristics is inside of him, and it's stable. It's not going to change. We should therefore take his driver's license away. And it's global. Well, we don't have evidence of global here. Maybe if we said people like him should be locked up, that might be global. There's no worth in this person at all. And so in Western cultures in particular, that's where this happens. So this habit in individualist cultures like the US and Australia, not so in collectivist cultures. People are much less likely to make this fundamental attribution error for other people's behaviors. But let's move on now and consider more, once again, about attributions we make for our own behaviors. Before we do that, here's another example of how we could consciously make decisions to attribute other people's failures to situations instead of to their own traits. And you can see this person, why is Laura late? And thinking, is it because she's just an unreliable person? This is inside of her. It's a stable trait. Or is it possible that maybe there was a situation, a big traffic jam, or her daughter was sick? And so we can just become more conscious when we catch ourselves doing that fundamental attribution error. And now, moving along to those attributions we make about our own successes and failures. So here we're going to look at just a simpler model. This is an extension on Heider's work, and it's by a guy named Weiner. And he offers two dimensions for thinking about how we explain our own actions, reactions, successes, and failures. So let's jump forward. Two key dimensions are internal versus external, and we know about those. Is this something inside the person or outside the person? But then we could also kind of make it a little simpler by deciding whether it's a controllable thing or uncontrollable. Is this something that the individual could change or not? And so then we end up having internal uncontrollable factors, personal factors inside the self that one cannot control. And we can have some debate about what that is. Some people think that a characteristic like athletic ability or intelligence is inside the self and out of control. So it depends on what you think about that. We could have an explanation that's internal but controllable. Factors within the self you can control, like how much you study. You can control that, hopefully. Or whether you lash out when you're feeling anger or regulate that. External uncontrollable are situational factors outside the self that you can't control, the traffic jam, for example. And external controllable are situational factors outside the self that you can control. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. So here's an example. Freddie has had many opportunities to get a job, but he procrastinates so much preparing his application that the job is usually gone before he finishes, so he doesn't get the job. So what kind of explanations might he make? So an internal uncontrollable attribution might be, it's not outlined here, but maybe he could say, I'm just not capable. I lack the ability to do things on time. It's inside himself and he can't control it. External uncontrollable might be something like, well, this home that I live in just has too much going on. You can't concentrate on anything here. He sees that as outside himself and uncontrollable. There's nothing he can do about it. An internal controllable factor might be saying something like, I've been letting myself sleep in too late. If I would be more disciplined and get up earlier in the morning, I could get this done. and an external controllable situational factors outside the self one can control. And that might be something like, my home is really noisy, but there is a library I could go to get this work done. He can't control the home, but he can control where he tries to do his work. So I have a couple more examples, and I think we'll focus on this one in class and work together with this one. Same thing. Some common internal uncontrollable attributions, which are some of the most problematic, might be hearing someone say something like this: I'm just not good at that. My mom wasn't good at that either. It just runs in my family. It's because of the trauma I experienced. All of these things you'll notice so far are inside the self and things that are perceived as being not controllable. I've always been like this. I'm too old to learn. I've never been able to. I really don't have a good mind for. I'm not a blank person. It's because of the way my parents raised me. And all of these limit an individual's potential. And it's just this very potential, the limitations of this potential, that we're going to take a look at in our next little lecture, going on to the work of Carol Dweck. So as a way of considering your own attribution habits, you might consider writing something about this for your journal. What attributions would you most likely make in these situations? So use the terms internal, external, and controllable, uncontrollable as you write down how you would explain these situations to yourself in your own mind. You got a speeding ticket as you sang along to a song on the radio. Or you applied to graduate school, but you weren't admitted. You weren't accepted. What if you forgot to pay your phone bill and your family's cell phone service was stopped? What if your partner or spouse or roommate forgot to put the leftovers away and now they're spoiled? See if you are making, what kind of attribution habits you have and how your attribution habits might differ when it's you who made the mistake versus your family member or roommate or friend who made the mistake.